Curriculum analysis is a great tool for understanding whether or not we must replace or adjust a current curriculum. Today I'm going to talk about Ohio Learning Standards for high school mathematics. To do so, we must focus on 5 fundamental aspects. The first 4, foundations, organization, content, and assessment, are focused on figuring out what the curriculum themselves is, whereas the 5th one, critique, talks about the curriculum as a whole and how we want to assess it. So first I'm going to start with foundations. Foundations is the idea that there is a purpose behind the curriculum, and it talks about the different affiliations between the people and the curriculum. I want to start off with the quote. The quote is, "The development of these standards begin with research-based learning progressions, detailing what is known today about how students' mathematical knowledge, skill, and understanding develop over time." End quote. This quote I got from the actual mathematics learning standards page in the introduction, and I find it really important because what it entails is that before they even tried creating standards, they wanted to step back and figure out where the kids should be. What should they kind of know? What is the basic things that they should be able to work on in their certain, mindset? And then from there, they're able to create their purpose. Their purpose, actually, and I want to quote this as well, is that the high school standards specify the mathematics that all students should study in order to be college and career ready. End quote. I find this really awesome because the idea that everything is forward progressive. We are working towards our future. We're not just learning things that we're not supposed to know. We're learning things that are going to help us in the future. And all of their standards can say that. They say that we are preparing people for their future. Now, the other aspect of foundations is the affiliations with the curriculum. There are 2 main groups that are focused on in this curriculum. The first is the students, and of course that would make sense because the students are the ones that are being taught. However, what's important is the fact that they talk about how there is variety in these abilities of the students, and that it's very hard to have specific standards for everybody. And what they do for that is they say that these standards that they created should be able to be for all students, allowing them to be college and career ready. As for the second group, they talk about the teachers. The teachers aren't really mentioned, but when they are mentioned, it's usually about assessment. They state that when, and I quote, "asking a student to understand something means asking a teacher to assess whether the student has understood it." End quote. That being said, the teacher is the main form of assessment. It is through them that we can figure out whether students truly understand that. It doesn't matter if the student says, "Oh, I understand it." The teacher is the one that can actually acknowledge their understanding. The next aspect to consider is organization. Organization is the idea of presenting the goals and the type of way that this curriculum is formatted. So I again want to start with another quote from the actual curriculum itself. And I quote, "These standards do not dictate curriculum or teaching methods." End quote. This almost seems redundant at first because we have a curriculum that doesn't really tell people what to do. But on further look, I find that it's really important because the teachers are allowed to have versatility with teaching these standards. Basically, as long as we cover the material, the organization can be kind of up to the teacher. And I think that really is good because not everybody learns the same way. Now, though that seems almost like disorganized, there are many other aspects that make this curriculum look organized. One is that I believe it's a part-to-whole sequence. The reasoning for this is because there are many, big, bold topics that need to be covered. But to do that, there are a bunch of little things, like all the little standards together make a whole. But you can't teach the whole without first going through the formulas and all the different things to lead up to the big picture. In a similar respect, I believe that the design of this organization of curriculum is academic subject. Most math classes are academic subject, but I believe especially with this curriculum, what we're looking at is specific big groups of information that needs to be taught at a certain point. I mean, 3 of them are algebra, geometry, and probability and statistics, which are specific classes that we teach. Therefore, I believe it is an academic design. The last aspect of the organization of this curriculum is this idea of practices. These practices are little snippets above each section that basically tell us the different processes and proficiencies that we should be able to do throughout these standards. Now, the processes include things like problem solving, reasoning and proof, communication, representation, and connecting. On the other hand, the proficiencies are the things that we should be able to understand, like adaptive reasoning, strategic competence, conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and productive disposition. If we lack any of these 2 things, the processes or the proficiencies, then we're really not understanding these standards as well as they're supposed to be met. And so we focus on this organization, doing these things. The third aspect is content. Content is the idea if the material is appropriate for the students. Is it too hard? Is it too easy? Other things is the material important? How does the material relate? Questions like that. Now, talking about how many standards there are is important. There should be not too many standards and not too little standards. Otherwise, we're either expecting too much or expecting too little. There has to be a happy medium. As for this curriculum, they state, and I quote, "It is important to recognize that fewer standards are no substitute for focused standards." End quote. By saying this, they're saying that we're not going to have just a few. We're going to have enough ones, but at the same time, we're also saying we have focused standards. We don't want things that are, unimportant. We have things that are specific, things that we expect and want our students to know. As per the material on the whole, all of the content that's being talked about in this high school, we're talking about 6 categories: number and quantity, algebra, functions, modeling, geometry, and statistics and probability. Out of all of that material, all the categories, I believe that the focus of the knowledge is more substantive than syntactical. I say this because I believe that most of the mathematical standards that we're looking at are understanding concepts, learning principles, gaining knowledge, rather than expecting the students to go forth and desire more knowledge. I mean, that is an end goal, but I believe that these specific standards that are in question allow for mainly just learning rather than seeking. As for the material as a whole, I believe that it is very influential. I believe that there is a lot of information that helps students with the real world. Mathematics is one of the subjects that is very difficult to bring to this real world scenario. So, what these standards do is they have a whole section on what's called modeling. Now, and I quote, modeling links classroom mathematics and statistics to everyday life, work, and decision making, end quote. This I quote from the standards page as well, is basically saying that we have applications and we use those. We don't just give people formula. We give them formula and then we tell them to use it in the real world. Circles are things that are in the real world. So when you learn about circles, then you do an example of circles in the real world. The fourth and final conceptual aspect of the curriculum is assessment. Assessment is mainly just figuring out if the students are actually understanding what they're doing, and how do we actually figure out that. I've learned that it's very hard, especially in this curriculum, to really state what type of assessments are best. Looking through, I didn't really find any assessment in specific that tell us how to see if the students are understanding. What they do say in this curriculum, and I will quote, "One hallmark of mathematical understanding is the ability to justify, in a way appropriate to the student's mathematical maturity, why a particular mathematical statement is true or where a mathematical rule comes from," end quote. This is very important for the curriculum because what it's saying is the why is important, and we have to assess it. We have to understand that the students need to conceptually know something. They can't just know the formula, they must understand the formula. Why we have the formula is very important. That being said, the page also says that the mathematical understanding and procedural skills are equally important, and that is a quote. Not only do we have to be able to do math, we should understand it. That is what they're saying, and they are equally as important as each other. And I cannot hound that much as much. They say that a bunch of times. I mean, the fact that there's, as I said before, the proficiencies and procedures. It's not one more than the other, it's both. And I think because of that, the assessment that is necessary, whether specific or not, is that we need both formative and summative evaluations. It doesn't make sense to only, learn what we're doing for next year, but the teachers themselves should be asking themselves, okay, how can I do better each day, each week, for the students to be able to understand more? And that's where the formative comes in. Having finished up the 4 sections, now it's time to do the critique. As I said before, the critique is kind of the section where we talk about the coherency of the curriculum. I myself believe that this learning standard of the Ohio high school mathematics field is pretty coherent. There's a lot of good things about it. It's very organized. It's also very flexible. You do not have to rigidly stick with something that might not work. Teachers can do whatever method they desire to help the students understand what is going on. And this is all really good. It helps the students to understanding. On the other side, there are some things that aren't as good. Sometimes it's a bit repetitious. The material from a couple sections, like, say, modeling, also appears everywhere else. Maybe it's not as in-depth in the other sections, but you have this section modeling, and it's, all about modeling, and it's talking about the purpose of this. But then in the other sections, it also talks about being able to model and being able to do this and that, and I feel like it is a little redundant. I still think it's kind of necessary. It hounds in the point that some things are very important, but it's almost a little too repetitious at points. The other thing is that because it doesn't really tell us how to implement, it doesn't really help teachers who might be struggling. If a teacher is having a hard time teaching something, whether it's calculus, whether it's algebra 1, because this curriculum doesn't help form a teacher in implementation, it's not really allowing the teacher to better go forward. All it does is tell us what we need to have them learn. And sometimes it doesn't even tell us what's, the most necessary thing to get done. All in all, again, I will say that I believe these standards are very good. There's definitely some not as good things, but all in all, I believe the coherency is very good, and that though maybe a few adjustments, like working on taking out some of the repetitiousness and maybe a few suggestions on how to implement, other than that, I believe that this curriculum is very good.